Kelly Denton-Borhaug. And do I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Good deal. Dr. Kelly Denton-Borhaug, professor of religion, program director, peace and justice studies minor, co-director, Moravian University Humanities Fellowship, cultural criticism of religion, militarism, and war in the U.S. context, moral injury, liberationist ethics, and Christian soteriology and
Mhm.
ethics. So, Dr. Denton-Borhaug, I got two quick questions for you before we get going.
Great.
What is liberationist ethics and soteriology?
So I am, by way of my education, training, teaching, and scholarship, a theological ethicist. That means I try to do with others ethical deliberation that takes seriously the deep religious resources as well as history, both positive and negative, of religious traditions, and in my case, specifically Christianity. Um, I'm particularly influenced by various strands of liberation theology in the history of Christianity. And I don't know if you and your listeners will be familiar with that term, but liberation theology now encompasses many, many diverse types of theology that are very concerned about the well-being, the freedom, the release from bondage of all kinds of human and non-human life forms, um, freedom from various forms of marginalization, oppression, bondage, violence. And so liberationist ethics refers to that strand of theology and ethical deliberation.
Mhm.
Soteriology is the particular theme in Christian theology that is focused on the plethora of understandings, questions, um, theories, images, narratives about what's referred to as Christian salvation. How do Christians understand the meaning of salvation, redemption, atonement? And I have actually, I really started out my work many years ago, especially focused on questions of soteriology. But soteriological questions have dogged me throughout. And they certainly are also really important, including in the work that I now am focused on when we're thinking about, um, for instance, one powerful image of salvation is that of healing. So what does healing look like in the context of moral injury?
Mhm.
Um, what would it mean to be healed from cultures of violence
Mhm.
and their their consequences
Mhm.
in all of our lives? So I'm still really I'm still really doing a lot of the same things
Wow.
done for over 25 years.
Are you
Even though
familiar
in
with
different forms. Yes,
John Deere's work?
I am.
I know he's touring the country now for his new
Right.
book. I don't know if you've seen that book,
I
Gospel of Peace.
haven't read it. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
What, did you want to say a little bit about that? About the book, Harvey?
Well, we have the book. I've read a little bit of it, but we're hoping he's going to come to Charleston next fall uh, and have a discussion group with the book. So we're working on trying to find a place to do that. And of course, he's been on the Veterans for Peace advisory board for many years. and he was very close with Daniel Berrigan, and so Daniel Berrigan's a hero of mine for certainly, and the other one that I'm very interested in is Thomas Merton, who's written so much on nonviolence as well.
Right. Right. Beautiful.
So what's the book about?
It's just talking about the underlying kind of the overarching message of the Gospels is peace, and what he means by peace, and every dimension, it's inseparable from justice, it's mercy, but so the bit that I have read is making me want to read more.
So, well, I doubt if he'll come to Nashville. Who knows? He might.
He may. He's really trying to branch out. He's based on the West Coast, so
Yeah,
he's trying to do more on this half of the
in this half.
continental divide.
So, all right. Well, Dr. Kelly, and let me just call you Kelly, if
Please.
that's okay. Okay. So, Kelly, we want to talk about moral injury, of course, but Memorial Day is coming up.
Right.
And what Harvey just mentioned about the John Deere book and what you just mentioned about healing, I think Memorial Day should be, I don't think it is, but should be maybe a holiday or a day when we try to heal a little bit by remembering the people who were lost in war, and for the most part, maybe, and this is my take on it, lost needlessly in war, and so there's a level of healing there. But we haven't had you on for 18 months, give or take, since Veterans Day a couple of years ago. Yeah, and so I know you've been studying moral injury. Have there been any progress, advancements, further information that you'd like to share with us about moral injury before we just try to connect everything to Memorial Day?
Sure. I sure. Will your listeners understand the terminology of moral injury?
It would probably be good if you let us know what the definition is.
I just, one of the things that I have been doing more recently is trying to connect more and provide more education for women veterans about moral injury. That's something that I think I'm somewhat uniquely positioned to do. I recently co-led a veteran women's retreat where I presented some very basic education on military moral injury. And this was to a group of about 10 women veterans who were, I'm going to say, probably most of them in their 40s and 50s. Many of them had been linked with the VA and with VA services for years. Some of them had experienced all of them had experienced military sexual trauma, actually. And some of them had been in the VA with therapeutic support. Only 2 had ever heard the terminology of military moral injury, 2 out of 10. And their immediate reaction to the basic education that I provided was that they were infuriated that nobody had ever told them about this before, including at the VA. And this is the Philadelphia VA, where there's a lot going on.
Yeah, that's the good one.
And I so I've been kind of pursuing some of that, but that experience, because I've been focusing on this now for years and also in pockets of the population where many people know about this, I had tended to think that perhaps familiarity with the terminology was more well spread than it actually is. I'm really questioning that. So one of the things that I did was to provide them with a series of different definitions for military moral injury. But basically, let me just start by saying this. Military moral injury and moral injury itself now is applied to many different contexts. But for the sake of what we're doing today, let's focus on military moral injury, right? Military moral injury is the experience of intolerable moral pain. Intolerable moral pain. Now, moral pain is part of the experience of being a human being. All of us experience moral pain in various degrees and in various situations. And moral pain in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. We experience moral pain because the world is not right, because the world is not healed, because there is terrible human suffering. And we also experience moral pain individually because we have the sense that we have not lived as we hoped we would have. We have made choices that we don't feel good about. We have hurt other people. We've hurt ourselves. Moral pain is I would say, a ubiquitous experience of human beings. When does it become moral injury? Moral injury is connected to the kind of moral pain that is intolerable. What does that mean? Peter Marin, who's a psychologist who wrote about a wonderful piece on moral pain, talked about different levels of moral pain. There's a kind of moral pain that has to do with experiencing bad conscience. That's the kind of pain that everybody experiences, right? But then there is the kind of moral pain that comes with experience of the suffering of the world that feels really overwhelming. That's a much deeper level of moral pain. The kind of moral pain that moral injury, I think, is connected with is a third level deeper still that combines the first two and then takes it further. It is the experience of moral pain of that overwhelming sense of things being wrong with me in the world, but there's another piece to it. I feel powerless to really do anything about it. I'm caught, I'm captured, I'm somehow rendered helpless or powerless to really do anything about it, okay? So moral injury is that devastating, terrible, debilitating, life-diminishing experience of moral pain. And people who have studied moral injury have identified two different pathways through which people experience this. One is the pathway that has to do with me as an agent of moral action. This is the pathway that has to do with my own decision-making, my own choices, my own betrayal of my moral compass, my deepest moral compass. So it's something that is very much centered on me. But the second pathway has to do with external forces. And in that sense, moral injury can also be experienced as the betrayal from outside of my moral compass. This can be on the part of people who have some sort of authority over me, people who have influence over me, people who in some way were responsible for me, people who were there to in some way protect me or support me or to help enhance my life to its fullest. And they betrayed that. They betrayed that responsibility. They betrayed, and it's not only individuals, it's not only people, it can also be institutions.
Mhm.
It can be nation states. Um, it can be cultures. So in that sense, the second type of pathway of moral injury is very broad and includes many different forces and actors.
Including the church.
Thank you. Absolutely. Including religious forces, religious understandings, religious actors. Absolutely. Absolutely. We could add political, we could add military, we could add educational, we could add healthcare. We could add a whole host of different actors to that list. So is that enough? I mean, I could, of course, I can always say more, but this was some of the education that I delivered to these women veterans. Oh, there was one other thing that I said that they found particularly important for their experience, and that was this. I stand with other researchers who identify moral injury as not a pathology. It is not a pathology. It is not a psychological deformation. It's not a personality disorder. It is the result of specific kinds of experiences and our human lives within those experiences. And the women that I was meeting with found that incredibly important because they have found that their suffering has been so deeply pathologized by so many different resources that have attempted to assist them. And that has too often increased their sense of stigmatization. They've been stigmatized as a result. So to hear that this is in fact moral injury, not only is it not a pathology, but that in fact moral injury may indicate an alive and deep conscience, was really important for them to hear. And in that sense, moral injury is a really important indicator that something is deeply wrong. And it's not only wrong with me, it's wrong with a much, much deeper context. And so to come back to the question that you started with, Jim, about what's happened in the last, 18 months or so, I think one of the insights that continues to grow for me, and that I find myself really working on more and more, has to do with understanding the very deep contextual nature of moral injury, how it erupts, what are its causal factors, and then subsequently, what does that mean in terms of how we address it? What does that mean in terms of how we address it? So, I've been doing some additional study and thinking, and actually writing just yesterday an article that I have co-written with Chris Antal, who I heard you talking about him.
Yep.
And Jack Saul, who is a clinical psychologist in New York, and Julie Burns, who is an up-and-coming psychology PhD, MD. We co-wrote an article on military moral injury that has just been published in a psychology journal. And one of the things that we addressed was the importance of a contextualized understanding and address of military moral injury. And we talked about the different ways that we are each doing that in our own ways in different contexts, but then learning from one another, and even a wider kind of contextual cross-fertilization. So one of the new phrases that I like to think about this using now is the phrase ecologies of violence. I'm thinking about, and I am deepening my own exploration of the ecologies of violence in the United States and in the wider world that are implicated in the development of military moral injury. And our need to, and this is going to bring us back to Memorial Day, our need to more deeply investigate, interrogate, understand, and develop a way to kind of critically address those ecologies of violence if we're going to get anywhere with a serious address of military moral injury.
Mm.
Oh, okay. Ecologies of violence. What do you mean by that?
Well, in moral injury research, there is a growing understanding among researchers that to understand and address moral injury, we can't simply remain at the level of an individual who is understood completely outside of all of the various contexts in which that individual has lived and continues to live.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we need to situate that individual in their rich, thick context and try to understand where moral injury fits in there. So researchers have developed one scale called, I'm probably not going to get this exactly right, but it's the inventory scale of PMIEs. Have you ever heard that?
No.
Before? It stands for potentially morally injurious experiences.
Okay.
So they've developed a typology, basically, of different kinds of experiences that people who live with moral injury identify as somehow key to their suffering.
Yep.
The development of military moral injury. That's helpful. That's helpful. What I'm trying to do, and I think the contribution that I can bring to bear, is to better situate PMIEs in all kinds of contexts. And I'm using what I call an ecological systems model. Tell me if this is too much and you don't want all of this academic. It's okay. Good.
It's good.
I'm using an ecological systems model. This goes all the way back to a psychologist by the name of Brofenbrenner, but it's been used most recently by a wonderful researcher by the name of Jennifer Gomez, who wrote a book called The Cultural Betrayal of Black Women and Girls. Really powerful, incredible resource in which she is arguing for the need to understand the deep, broad, complicated, contextual background, contextual life of Black women and girls if researchers and clinicians like herself are to better understand and be able to really address the trauma that is far too widely experienced by Black women and girls having to do with sexual harassment and sexual violence.
Okay.
So an ecological systems model starts with the individual, but then there are a series of concentric circles that keep moving out and pulling in larger and larger vectors of human experience. So after the individual, and we all are probably familiar with this from various psychological studies that we underwent in college, right? After the individual, you have the family and the local community. Then you have institutions. This would include things like educational institutions, religious institutions, military institutions. You move out further, you start to involve things like the nation state or states. And eventually you get to much wider circles that involve worldviews and changing eras in history and cultural factors. So it just keeps moving out and out and out. And what I'm trying to think about are the ways in which all of these different circles are somehow linked
Mhm.
to what is happening in the life of that individual. So that if we really want to understand and address the military moral injury that somebody has experienced, and even that they have identified as being linked to, let's say, a particular set of potentially morally injurious experiences, we need to understand, where did those experiences come from? How did they develop? What were the resources that backed them up? What were the cultural forces that interplayed with whatever happened? How were different institutions involved? What kind of era were we living in, or are we living in? And how is that it somehow also involved? The particular elements that characterize, let's say, this point in time from, let's say, the Vietnam era that I know both of you two hail from.
Yep.
So it's that kind of investigation.
Okay.
And I've
Let me-
I've really been focused on that.
Let me give you what I'm thinking might be an example.
Mhm.
We had Larry Abair, the young airman who went on hunger strike out in front of the White House for about a week. We had him on the show probably about a month and a half ago. And um, he was going on hunger strike because what he was asked to participate in, even though he was assigned to Rota, Spain, and so he was outside of the immediate area of Gaza and what Israel is doing to Gaza. He still felt like he was a participant in this horror. And so he went on hunger strike. He joined a couple of rallies or demonstrations with Code Pink to try and make a point. And we asked him, why did you join the military? And it was at that point that he said, well, I didn't really know what to do. I I didn't know much about politics, and I thought the military might be the right choice at the time, and gives me a chance to serve the country, maybe pay for my education. And when I listen to what you're saying, it's like Larry had no his circles were very narrow before he
Yes.
joined the military, and then all of a sudden he joins the military and his circles expand and he doesn't like it. Is this?
Yes, yes. I guess what I'm also hearing in what you're saying, Jim, is that it 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 sounds as though there has been something of a rude awakening for him in terms of awareness.
Yeah.
And so one wants to ask, what happened? What happened way back when? What shaped the consciousness that he had at that point? How was it shaped, and why was it shaped in a particular way?
Mm-hmm.
And 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 what have been the experiences that have challenged that particular, and not only experiences but learning, and as I listen to you describe him, I would like to ask him if he were here with us, I would like to ask him to really think harder about his youth, his family, his community, his understanding of the nation, his understanding of all kinds of institutions, to think about so I would ask him this: what do you think you were absorbing? What were you absorbing
Mm-hmm.
in the contexts in which you were situated? What were the stories from your family, from your religious community, if you had one, from your schools, from your participation on national holidays like Memorial Day, from maybe the recruiters who came to your high school, the military recruiters, from, I don't know,
Yeah.
Listening to presidential speeches at the State of the Union or what have you, from participating in parades or Fourth of July festivities or baseball games or playing video games, or I mean the list goes on and on and on, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
What I would like to ask him is to really I this is what I do now with some of the veterans that I'm working with, some of the veteran leaders that I'm working with, and I kind of hope to do this a little bit with you in our conversation today. I ask them to sit down and to try to really diagram their own circles
Mm.
and their own the shaping of their own lives. And now to borrow a different heuristic tool, the ways that they absorbed various elements of structural and cultural violence. And of course, we all absorb this, especially as children, as young people, really oftentimes until we have the kind of hitting the brick wall, like it sounds this man did,
Yep.
that forces us to take a big step back and say, wait a minute, what happened? What happened to me? How was I shaped? How did I become the person that I was? And why am I what's happening now that I feel so differently? And that suddenly the scales have been pulled away from my eyes.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask him to think about, where did you experience, I mean, where do you think the tentacles of structural violence influenced and impacted your young life? What about cultural violence? What about worldviews, religious worldviews, political, nationalistic, military, entertainment, capitalist? What about worldviews? How do you think you were shaped by all of this? And to what result? To what kind of consequence, right?
Exactly. So, and I guess this brings us down to the specifics around Memorial Day, because, well, you know, for me, once I got out of the Navy, once I got out of the military, um, Memorial Day I pretty much ignored it. And, you know, put that in the back pocket. It's just a day off, fine. See you later. Um, there was no memorial to Memorial Day. And then you get married, you have kids, and, it's a great day for softball and baseball. And then, when I started looking around at what Memorial Day should be, then that's when I kind of got really, really angry that, and when I was teaching the sixth graders, and Memorial Day was kind of like, okay, that's when actually school ends. Even if they don't get out until 2 weeks later, that's kind of when school ends. And that's also when the pool opens, and, on and on and on. And so I would try and teach a class. I would teach a class about Memorial Day, where I would go to a website called the Virtual Wall, and I would look in their small little town, China Grove, North Carolina, and I would look through that and let them scroll through it, the thousands and thousands and thousands of names of young people just from North Carolina who had been killed in Vietnam. And they got to their own little town, and they saw the two guys that were there, and tried to point out that this is what Memorial Day is. It's not all about hot dogs. It's not all about the pool opening, but that's, and hopefully for 1 or 2 years, maybe that's what they considered Memorial Day. But Memorial Day is it's been an aggravation to me, the way Americans memorialize Memorial Day. I mean, I just drove back yesterday with my wife from the store or someplace, and bunting, bunting. No, no bunting on Memorial Day. You know, these red, white, and blue things, and I'm thinking, no, that's not it. So, am I nuts?
Can I ask you, and I really would love to hear from Harvey too about maybe I can ask both of you this question.
Yeah.
What do you remember about Memorial Day from before you were drafted?
You want to go ahead, Harvey? Or you want me to go ahead?
Well, well, you were drafted. I was in Navy ROTC in
Okay,
college.
that's right.
But I joined during one of those rare hiatuses in the U.S. where we were not at war.
Okay.
I wasn't prepared for that. But
Okay.
the only time I really thought of Memorial Day as anything serious is if someone I knew had a family member, like a father or grandfather, who had died in a war.
Uh-huh.
And, I could see that would be an emotional day for them. How hard would that be when all you're seeing on TV is Memorial Day sales and Memorial Day cookouts or patriotic stuff, which has nothing to do with Memorial Day. But my feelings and thinking about Memorial Day have changed a lot just in the last few years, since I moved from Nashville to Charleston, South Carolina, which, as a lot of people know, was the epicenter of the slave trade in North America. And I found out that Charleston also was the site of the first Memorial Day. And I don't know how many people are aware of that. There's actually a historical marker at this place called Hampton Park, which during the Civil War was converted into a prison for Union soldiers. By the end of the Civil War, there was a mass graveyard on that property. 250 Union soldiers were buried, some of them black soldiers.
Wow.
And on May the 1st of 1865, the end of the Civil War, thousands of enslaved people had been freed, and actually, there were a lot of formerly enslaved people not that far away in Beaufort, South Carolina, which is about 2 hours from Charleston, who had been freed for like since 1862 because the Federals people took over that area, and and they had thousands of enslaved people working rice plantations and indigo plantations and things, and these people they started their own new lives. They had someone who had been a slave who had made some money and granted land, and they had a school. They got teachers to come down from Maine. So they were way ahead of the pack, and so they contributed to this idea of having a Memorial Day. The black clergy in the area, and blacks who had been able to be freed just from buying their way freedom or whatever, they wanted to do something to honor these Union soldiers, and so they staged this event on May 1st, 1865. Barely 2 weeks after Lincoln's assassination. And they had this parade on the grounds led by school children from these freedmen schools down in Beaufort, South Carolina, who came up for it. And they said the crowd was in the thousands. And they just paraded around this area. And there were clergy, there were members of various Union brigades and colored Union colored infantry brigades. And this historical marker, explains all that and says, this was the first observance and celebration of what would become Memorial Day. So, I was just taken by that.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And because of that, I went to Beaufort last year for Memorial Day, Beaufort, South Carolina.
Hmm.
And my daughter, Suzanne, who's a millennial, came with me. And I didn't know what to expect because South Carolina's Trump country, And we saw our fair share of Trump signs and bumper stickers on our way down there. So I thought, well, we've got our Veterans for Peace shirts, and how are people going to react? And I thought, well, let's just go and find out. And we just found where the parade route was, and we were, along the side of the road. And I noticed that most of the citizens who were along the side of the road were African American, and that made me feel safer. So, and everyone was very friendly and asked me where we're from, and they, oh, you came all this way, But really, I had to find a real Memorial Day observance. Even Charleston, all they had was a concert in that same park, but it was more like patriotism. It wasn't, it wasn't to me. It was not appropriate to Memorial Day. And I met. Well, the first thing that happened was I heard someone behind me saying, "Can I take a picture of your T-shirt?" And it was a young woman and her husband and their two kids, a white couple. And she had, I have this Veterans for Peace T-shirt, and on the back of it says, "I hate war as only a soldier." I don't know if you're familiar with that quote from Eisenhower. As only a soldier who has lived it, experienced its brutality, its futility, its barbarity. And they were really taken by that. And we talked about Veterans for Peace and what we were doing, and they were all interested in it. So we felt really good about that. And before long, we thought that was, going to be something we could hang our hat on for the rest of the day. Then we met another couple, older, probably in their 60s, and the woman started asking me about Veterans for Peace. And she told me that she had been involved with a local production of a play called A Piece of My Heart. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that play. Well, it's a play based on a book by this fellow Keith Walker, who interviewed 26 Vietnam veteran nurses and their experiences. And you talk about moral injury. This is full of moral injury. And this woman, Shirley Lauro, made it into a play. And I forget when it first came out. It was in maybe the 80s or something. But I found out that play's been all over. It's even been to South Africa. It's been widely acclaimed. And so we talked about that. I interviewed her for the show. And during that time, she told me she had a brother. I asked her if she had any veterans in the family or if she was a veteran. She said, well, my brother. And he died at age 53 from Agent Orange.
Oh, my.
And he'd been in Vietnam as a Marine. So it was really moving, to have these experiences. Then she and her husband invited Suzanne and I over to their house, which was not far, so she could show me the poster from the play and the book that it was based on. And we had a wonderful conversation. She made tea and we had cookies and all this stuff. And then she said, well, you want to get down to the cemetery because they'll be having the program down there, which wasn't that far. It's that they have a national cemetery there in Beaufort that's primarily colored troops, primarily Civil War veterans. And at the entrance to this cemetery, there's this tower kind of in the same shape as like the Washington Monument, maybe about 25 feet high. And it's inscribed to the memory of those uh, who fought to save American freedom against the Great Rebellion, and which was the Confederates, the Great Rebellion.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, we have a national cemetery in Nashville that has how many, 900 or so colored troops buried there, Jim?
Yeah,
But there's
if,
nothing like that,
if you can find them. So.
But, and this monument was actually put in place in 1880 something. But it was like I was in a dream, I was just seeing all this stuff that I never thought I would see. And the actual program was very somber and beautiful. They had a small band, a Marine band, that just played an instrumental version of America the Beautiful, but extremely slow. It almost sounded like a dirge, it was just so moving.
Right.
And then they
Right.
had speakers, and once the speakers started, some of them were politicians. Most of them were white, so we didn't stick around for that part. But going home, I just thought about that a lot and thought I never realized that Memorial Day was so just organically rooted to the Civil War.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and
Huh.
to me, a lot of the pathology we have in this country is still a result of that legacy of
Yes.
slavery, that legacy of racism, black codes, Jim Crow, all
Right.
these things that we never really come to terms with.
Right. Right. Um, so thank you. That's what a powerful story,
Incredible. And I
Harvey.
thought a piece of my heart when I was getting ready for the show, I thought
Yeah.
metaphor for moral injury.
Ah, wonderful. Wonderful. Listening to you, the first thing that really strikes me um, is that yes, people really need, and it's such a kind of universal part of human experience, the need for there to be honest and authentic expressions of communal grief.
Yes.
This is a really deep, I think, universal human need. We really do need that.
Right.
You experienced that. And
Yeah.
you're also talking about the way in which that experience is in such contrast to the way that Memorial Day often takes
Yes.
place.
Right.
Not authentic, which does not create that space for the expression of really deep, painful grief. Uh,
Right.
and the I too was doing a little bit of thinking in preparation for today and going back to some of the things that I've written in the past and some notes um and I did really, my own understanding was really expanded years ago around the importance of the Civil War in the development of all of this, that the losses of the Civil War were so massive,
Yes.
so overwhelming that the devastation that people experienced was so just beyond the imagination. There were various kinds of developments that grew out of this need for expression of that grief, and
Yes.
the seeking of various forms of support. Um, Actually, I think the origins of what today we think of as Thanksgiving go back to that same period of time. And
Mm.
Thanksgiving, this was something I think that President Lincoln um, inaugurated at a particular point in time, Thanksgiving as a way for people to come together and share those kinds of expressions of grief. Um, but you know, I was also and there's a wonderful book by a historian, Drew Gilpin Faust. This something of suffering, this I don't think it's community. I'm missing the second word.
Mhm.
This Republic of Suffering. That might be what it is.
Mhm.
The name of her book. She explored the consequence of the depth of these losses and what it meant for certain kinds of nationalism that came to
Yeah.
the fore after that period. And one of the things that happened is that the rhetoric of sacrifice became much more predominant after that time
Mhm.
in the memorializing. And it's not that it wasn't around before. It's always been around
Yeah.
as long as there's been war, I think.
Yeah.
But it really took hold after the time of the Civil War and became a much stronger part of US culture in terms of thinking about the meaning of the military and particularly military losses. And there are
Yes.
all kinds of consequences for the nation as a result of that. So, it's really, as I was getting ready for today, I was thinking about really two things that are in conflict with one another, it seems to me. One being the way that Memorial Day generally tends to be commemorated, which is, as you both have been saying, in particularly commoditized, shallow,
Trivialize.
trivialized, yes, um, entertainment driven,
Mhm.
profit driven
Yeah.
ways, right? And then this really kind of very deep-seated need that is universally human that your story really exemplifies. And what's also really interesting about your story, Harvey, is that here is a case where the the experience of communal grief was wide enough to incorporate Black experience. And that is not always the case. I mean,
Right.
that we one of the issues with Memorial Day has to do with the way in which the narratives and the rituals of Memorial Day focus grief like a laser in particular directions that leave out all kinds of people, communities, nations, losses, so that our experience in this particular pathway are all that we see, are what we focus on, are what become really important to the invisibility of so much else.
Mhm.
And your experience was one that kind of broke through that, it sounds like, in a
Yeah, it
beautiful
felt
way.
that way to me. It really did.
That's really powerful.
Mhm.
Um, I'm yeah, I'm so glad you were able to experience that and how wonderful for the community that's been able to keep that alive
Right.
and and really nurture that deeper, authentic, and much more expansive experience of communal grief. So,
If
The Memorial Day used to be called Decoration Day,
mhm,
and Memorial Day used to have its own day, May 30th. And then all of a sudden they made it a Monday after a weekend, which to me kind of trivialized it anyway. Like, oh, okay, they're just looking for a 3-day weekend. It doesn't really matter. Uh, so,
yeah.
uh, excuse me. And so that was part of the culture that we kind of grew up with, um, and like Harvey, it got a nice slap in the face with regard to Memorial Day. It's one of those things where um, I didn't get such a nice slap in the face. It was kind of like a growing angst as I started realizing, well, why do we have this holiday in the first place
Mhm.
if we're not going to take it serious? And then I realized, okay, we don't take much anything serious.
It's a merchandising opportunity,
Yeah.
basically.
So I
mhm,
guess the question goes back to our war culture.
mhm, mhm.
Mhm.
So I have a lot of different thoughts running through my mind right now. in some ways, Memorial Day is a commemoration of martyrdom, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And that's a particular theme that I've explored. What is martyrdom, and how does it function in the U.S. context? How does it function around these special days of commemoration, like Veterans Day, Memorial Day, even 4th of July? There is a little bit of this.
I don't think American culture is comfortable with the concept of martyrdom. They like heroes.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think you are right. Um,
Which only glorifies war and helps perpetuate it.
but think about, I mean, we do, there are all kinds of ways that the death of military service members in wars are held up as the sort of highest culmination of citizenship, right?
Mhm.
And even as something that is sacred. And there and once again, this is we don't tend to think about this very deeply. I wish that Memorial Day was a day when we could come together and reflect much more deeply about what is the meaning of these deaths,
Mhm.
and not only why have they happened, but what do they mean to us, and how should we think about them? I
Mhm.
wish there were, and also, what are appropriate ways of grieving, and and who should be included in that grief? Which deaths should be
Right.
included?
Which ones count? Yeah.
So I wish we could ask all of those kinds of questions, but we generally don't. And
Right.
and this, in my mind, I really wondered about that for a long time. Why don't we ask more questions? Why don't we think about these things more deeply? And what I came to understand is that even though I think you're right, Harvey, we're very uncomfortable with the language of martyrdom, but this is actually, it is martyrdom that we are enacting and commemorating in the ways that we do it on Memorial Day.
Martyrdom implies a noble cause.
Well,
How many of our wars had anything to do with a noble cause?
yes, yes. But think about, are you familiar with the Luminary Initiative of that this is something that began in the I think in the 1930s. It was a national resolution that was passed by the houses of Congress that on a particular day of the year, and I think it's in the fall,
Mm.
that everyone would put a candle in the window.
Mm.
And this is something that has become really important to, especially to Gold Star mothers.
Yes.
They would put a candle in the window, and that would be a way of commemorating and honoring mothers
Mm.
who have lost children, who had lost sons, as it was, understood
Right.
then, in wars. And this is something that still happens. So you're asking a good question. Are these deaths really for a noble cause? The rituals and the thinking that goes along with practices of martyrdom, you're right, tend to cover the deaths with a kind of sacred sheen of nobility, of honor, of glory. And they
Mhm.
also tend to push it to the back away from much critical questioning by making it
Mhm.
sacred. So when something is sacred, you're not really supposed to question it. If you question it, that makes you a heretic.
Bingo.
Well,
Thank you.
we've got
You're supposed to honor it, and you're supposed to revere it and bow down before it.
uh
So this is a part of our practices. And even by what you're saying, wait a minute, these
yeah,
deaths have not all been in a noble cause. That is like a wrench being thrust into the gears of the ways that we perform martyrdom in the United States on days like Memorial Day. I mean, think about the national and the state and even the local community rituals that do take place. I think the one that you've described, Harvey, is somewhat of an outlier, honestly.
yeah,
But the general trend is much more along the lines of performative martyrdom, I would say.
yes. The event is sponsored by the Sons of Union Veterans in Beaufort.
Is this the group in Beaufort?
Yes, in Beaufort.
So
they're
yes.
primarily African American.
Right. So we're already talking about a group that is outside of the kind of dominant thrust of a day like Memorial Day, or even commemorations of the Civil War. So for instance, as I was looking over a number of different different historical sites and bits and pieces of historical information, one of the really fascinating things I came across was what happened when the Lincoln Memorial was first celebrated and memorialized, and it was on Memorial Day.
Yes.
It was on Memorial Day when that first happened. It was something like 57 years after Lincoln's assassination. But at that gathering on the National Mall in front of the Lincoln Memorial, there was a concerted attempt to downplay the part of Lincoln's legacy that had to do with the full inclusion and equality of Black citizens.
Emancipation.
And to shine the light on the Civil War as the effort to keep the Union together.
Save the Union, yes.
And in fact, at that same gathering, they segregated the Black people who attended away into a particular part of the gathered community there, off to the side, apart from, and they were a smaller number, apart from the dominant white crowd.
Right.
So once again, even in these celebrations, what you experience has tended not to be the norm.
Right.
Right?
That's right. And, Veterans for Peace, I think, has a little kind of a, I don't know if it's inherent unease with, how do we handle Memorial Day? Because, we are necessarily outspoken and confronting in our, trying to undo this militaristic culture and all that. I mean, it's not uniformly that way. I mean, like the Golden Rule sailboat is not that way, but many times, we're very strident, and that's not something that would be appropriate on Memorial Day.
Why not?
Out of respect for the dead.
Well, you can be strident in your respect.
Well, I mean, that's my opinion. I mean,
yeah,
I think, if the purpose of Memorial Day is to pay our respects and to honor those dead from our wars, to me, that calls for a respectful tone and a respectful behavior.
Well, I guess that's
what
that's what makes me strident. That's what makes me angry. That's what makes me nuts, because Memorial Day, remember the dead, remember the dead. But forget about why they were sent. Forget about the betrayal.
Well,
Forget
I
about
know,
the 58,000 plus killed in Vietnam for
right?
nothing.
Right.
For nothing. 30,000 killed in Korea
Yeah.
for nothing. How many thousands in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Yeah.
6, 7, 8,000 killed for nothing.
Well, not for nothing, but not for anything that benefited the people of this country or other ones. But I
Well,
think I'm feeling like when these remarks I'm going to talk about on Tuesday when we do our Zoom about it, I say, I think it's hard to improve on Lincoln, on Abraham Lincoln's words, the Gettysburg Address, or even the second inaugural address, where he basically said,
yeah, we cannot
all we
honor
can
more
do,
these people
yeah,
than, yeah.
it is for we the living to dedicate ourselves to fulfilling the promise of a nation, of a government, of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's what this war was about, to save that proposition, to live up to that proposition. And I think, that's a lot of what Veterans for Peace fights for on every different front is directed to that same goal.
Yeah.
Also in the second inaugural address, where he talked about, our goal is to achieve a just and lasting peace among ourselves and among the nations of the world. I mean, to me, that it's hard to improve on that.
The only way I could improve on that, and I want to bring I want to bring Kelly back into the conversation, but the only way you can improve on that is implement it.
Well, I know. I mean, those are just
Make
words.
it happen.
But I think Veterans for Peace, if you look at all our national efforts and projects, it's all directed toward essentially
Mm-hmm.
those goals.
Yep.
I'd be interested in hearing uh, Kelly's thoughts on that.
Well, before I get to Kelly's thoughts on that, I want to read something from her book
Oh, yeah.
because because she had a great paragraph from her book, and her book is "And Then Your Soul Is Gone: Moral
Mhm.
Injury and the U.S. War Culture."
Yeah.
And if you're a veteran, you need to get it and read it. If you're a non-veteran, you need to get it and read it. Um, if you know a veteran, you need to get it and read it. So, but she says, instead of perpetuating lies about the meaning of war, churches could host gatherings on Veterans or Memorial Day to listen to the painful aftermath of war in the lives of service members, veterans, and war refugees.
Mhm.
We might study moral injury, the life extinguishing anguish that haunts too many veterans who betrayed their own moral compass or were morally betrayed by leaders and systems of war culture in our own era of empire. All right. So, with that, Kelly, Harvey, and I have been ranting. So, take it away.
Sure. Well, so let's keep imagining together, building on Harvey's wonderful example from Buford on authentic and respectful and um, I'm going to say more expansive commemorations.
Mhm.
And so here's what I would want to suggest. I wish that on Memorial Day we could mourn war. First and foremost, let's mourn war as an institution, and I want to hold side by side the power of education with the need for ritual and the expression of emotion and communal bonding. But in
Mhm.
terms of education, um, I would love for people to ask more questions, why is the US such a warring country? What makes it possible? What are the systems and the structures, the money, the bases, the weapons producing corporations, and on and on and on. And also what are the types of cultural apparatus like martyrdom that have come to so shape how we understand ourselves, and that situate us so definitively toward seeing violence as the only best, important, unique option in every conflict. So education, but in terms of commemoration. So to start with, can we simply mourn war? Could Memorial Day, instead of being a day in which war is really glorified by way of expressing grief for fallen service members. Along the way, war itself is glorified and even sacralized. Can we take that apart and develop ways of actually mourning war itself as an institution that we need to try to put behind us? We need to move the needle away from war and war culture. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in our mourning, can we widen the screen, widen the context, not only service members, but also the people in the countries, the civilians, the healthcare workers, the journalists, the children, especially the children. Can we widen the screen to mourn them too? To mourn the consequences of war? Can we widen the screen to focus on the devastating environmental consequences of militarization and an actual war? Widen the screen to mourn how much in the way of fossil fuels the US military uses every day? Can we widen the screen to mourn these things? That to me would be a much more authentic way of approaching Memorial Day. I would love to see that. I would love, instead of hearing the voices of the politicians I would love to hear the voices of people who are actually living with moral injury side by side with the voices of refugees, the voices of displaced people, the voices of healthcare professionals, journalists, and others who have been so exposed to its devastation. So I'm now a part of a number of, they're still small, but circles where this is happening. This is actually happening. And I think Veterans for Peace, and I guess I'm imploring you and offering this up as an opportunity. I would love to see Veterans for Peace become much more involved in hosting these kinds of commemorations of Memorial Day. Wouldn't it be fabulous if this was what was happening every time Memorial Day or Veterans Day rolled around, that you had these kinds of gatherings and rituals and hearing of these kinds of voices, and also opportunities for people to learn about war culture and to question it, and to also become much more deeply aware of its true beneficiaries, because it's not us,
Right.
right? So I wish that all of those kinds of things could happen, and those kinds of things are happening, but I think on a really relatively small scale. And so one of the questions that I have is, how do we grow this into much larger proportions Excuse me, I'm kind of getting over a cold. But I think it's incredibly difficult because all of this, and even what you experienced, Harvey, goes against the grain of war culture.
Mhm.
It goes against the grain. And I have explored, and I do believe there are extremely strong silencing mechanisms in our culture that mitigates against this kind of growth and expansion. But nevertheless, there really is no other choice but to continue to push back against that and continue to try to develop more and more, invite. And I am increasingly thinking about this on smaller and smaller scales. So when I meet with 10 women veterans, that's a very small group, but it's significant. And they're going to go out to all of their comrades, as they call them, and colleagues and talk about what they have learned. And when there is one small gathering that is initiating this kind of countercultural and alternative commemoration, that can make an impact, and it has the capacity to grow. So I don't really know what else to do other than that, to keep trying to expand the opportunities for deeper and broader learning, and to try with others to develop ways of coming together that challenge these dominant, negative, death dealing, I want to say, cultural practices. That's where I am.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
I'm just struggling to find ways to actually do what you say as far as expanding this. And I know we could keep you for 2 or 3, 4, 5 hours because we haven't talked about suicides. We haven't talked about, Aaron Bush now. We haven't talked about the people who left the State Department or whatever, as far as their experiences and what your thoughts are there. And we could if you want, but also we can't keep you for hours at a time. But I guess, is there something you came in saying, I'm thinking I wanted to make sure I said this before? I mean, we've been on, for an hour and 24 minutes.
Wow.
But this is just
Well,
extraordinary because, you know, there's so many things to get just upset about going on these days. And, my futility about not being able to do anything, or my frustration with going down to Nashville and being in a rally of 10 people and thinking, where the hell are the rest of you? And, just, anyway, that's it. So,
Just go knock on your neighbors' doors to talk to them.
oh, for Christ's sake, Harvey.
That's what my buddy Greg Payton, the Vietnam veteran
Yeah.
who's Sir No Sir and part of the Long Bin Rebellion. He said, look, standing out and handing out leaflets doesn't change anybody's minds.
No.
You have to
Well,
get with the circle of people that know you, and you have to be able to talk with them and listen to them.
I got my Veterans for Peace flag out. So, Kelly, what
Yeah,
do you
maybe
want?
I would also love to invite people who are anywhere within a reasonable distance to come to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania next Veterans Day, where we will have an on-site, in-person healing ceremony on our campus. This will be the third time that we've done it on Veterans Day. It will feature veterans living with moral injury who are giving testimony about their moral injury. And it will be attended by students who are finishing a course on military moral injury that I co-teach with Chris Santal. And it is open to the wider community. Anybody can come. Again, we'll ask people to pre-register, but anybody could email me if they're interested, and we would be really, really delighted to see anybody there. These are the kinds of gatherings that I think are possible. They're not hard to do. I would love to see more communities hosting gatherings like these that really that create the intentional space for people to speak hard, painful truths about their experience in a setting where listeners have demonstrated that they really want to hear. And this is why this isn't happening in so many other places. People don't really want to hear, right? But
For sure.
to the degree that we can continue to develop opportunities like these and expand the circles, we're doing good work, and we need to keep doing it. So next Veterans Day, so that'd be next November 11th. I think it's a Monday. You're welcome to come to Moravian University and attend that healing ceremony. I will tell you, it's a really beautiful, powerful experience. Or attend through Zoom, the one that's coming up really soon, just next Thursday. And I could talk about other kinds of events that are also happening, but I'll just leave it at that with those two. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
for
this is
your time.
always really this is so important because not only I think do veterans automatically have a level of moral injury, I think really the country right now, as demonstrated by the students, as demonstrated by some of the folks that have left their jobs or either self-immolated or done whatever to speak out. I think there's a lot of moral injury going on through the country. And so yeah, this is so important, Kelly. And we always end with a song. And I do have one in mind, with your permission. Where have all the flowers gone?
Oh, wonderful.
I love that.
So, because I think that's probably the best Memorial Day song.
Beautiful.
So, with that, thanks. And what we just like to have you back on as time goes by.
Yeah, we shouldn't
Veterans
wait
Day.
this long next time around.
No, we shouldn't. No.
Sure. So I'll tell you before I leave you, just so that you know, I'm starting work on another book.
Oh, wow.
I'm planning on the book being centered around the stories of, I'm not exactly sure how many, 5, 6, 7 veterans, and their narratives of their moral injury, a more in-depth storytelling about their moral injury, specifically focusing on making the connections to these wider circles in the ecologies of violence and the vectors of structural and cultural violence. So that's and what I particularly would really be glad for is, and I'm thinking about this, is for this to be a book that could be used in spiritual communities or in Veterans for Peace communities, other activist peace communities, for people to read together, hear these stories, and then think about these really important connections with the idea that what is really incumbent upon us is to challenge the bigger circles, to challenge the systems, to challenge the institutions, to challenge the vectors of cultural violence, and really be engaged in building a different world.
Excellent. Let's do that.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll let you know as that. And I'll also just include a link to this latest article that's just been published.
Please.
It is an academic article, but it's I'm pretty proud of it. I think it's good.
Oh yeah, please
Nice.
do that. I'd love to read that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we've got an academic audience.
Wonderful.
So, all right,
Okay.
Kelly.
Thank you both so much. Take good care.
Yep,
I'd-
you
We'll
too.
be in touch.
Okay,
Okay. Bye now.
thanks.
Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? Young girls have picked them, every one. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they ever learn? Where have all the young girls gone? Long time passing. Where have all the young girls gone? Long time ago. Where have all the young girls gone? Gone for husbands, everyone. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they ever learn? Where have all the husbands gone? Long time passing. Where have all the husbands gone? Long time ago. Where have all the husbands gone? Gone for soldiers, everyone. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they ever learn? Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the soldiers gone? Gone to graveyards, everyone. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they ever learn? Where have all the graveyards gone? Long time passing. Where have all the graveyards gone? Long time ago. Where have all the graveyards gone? Gone to flowers, everyone. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they ever learn? Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? Young girls have picked them, everyone.